Number 1. Mall. A few years back, I had a really terrifying experience during the Christmas season. I am married and I have children. I have a boy and a girl. My son had already grown out of believing in Santa Claus, but my daughter was young enough to maintain her belief. In fact, she was always looking forward to heading to the mall, so she could ask for what she wanted for Christmas. That year was no different. She was all joy and happiness as we headed off to the mall to make the yearly visit. My son, of course, would not be taking part in the sitting on his lap, and would likely spend most of his time in the video game store or in the arcade. But my daughter's face was lit up brighter than the star on the tree. The line at the mall was long. I mean, that made sense since it was the weekend before Christmas, so we were going to have a really long wait. It wasn't a problem though, because her excitement was apparent throughout the entire wait. When my daughter finally got to sit in his lap, she seemed fine at first. However, after a moment or two, her expression changed. She began to look scared, and then she began to squirm. For the first time ever, my daughter jumped off his lap, ran over to me, and buried her face against my leg. I was surprised, but I guess I just figured it could have been any number of things that had spooked her. The rest of the time at the mall, she kept as close to me as possible. She insisted that I hold her hand throughout the entire time. I began wondering if maybe she was just a bit freaked by the number of people at the mall. We did a little last bit of Christmas shopping, and then I gathered the children together to head home. The ride home was no better. My daughter insisted sitting in the front seat, which annoyed her brother to death. But I let her do it. She just seemed agitated the entire way home. At home, things were just like they had been. My daughter was upset by something, and I had to ask her what was wrong. However, the only response was that she would shake her head, indicating she was not going to tell me. This began to go on for the next day or so, and I really could not begin to even understand what was wrong with her. She seemed nervous. Hell, she would not even lay in front of the Christmas tree and look at the lights, which had been one of her favorite things to do. It continued up until Christmas Eve. I wanted to go ahead and put the kids to bed so they could get up early in the morning. My son had no issue with it, but my daughter began to panic. She tried to keep from going to bed. When I told her she had to go to sleep, or Santa Claus would not be coming, she actually told me she didn't want him to come. She asked me to do whatever I could to keep him from coming. Well, of course I was confused. When I asked her what was wrong, she again shook her head. I tried to explain to her that if she was scared of something, the best way to get me to be able to protect her would be to tell me what she was scared of. After pausing for a few moments, my daughter finally revealed to me why she had been upset for the past few days. At the mall, when she was sitting on Santa Claus's lap, she said he whispered to her, "If you've been naughty at all, I'll be coming to kill you on Christmas Eve when you fall asleep." My daughter was upset because she knew she hadn't been 100% good all the time. I was furious, of course, but I couldn't do anything about the mall Santa Claus that night. So instead, I told my daughter that the man wasn't the real Santa Claus, and that the real Santa Claus wouldn't hurt her no matter what. She wasn't convinced. So I asked her if she had ever been naughty in previous years. She admitted she had, and I told her Santa Claus hadn't hurt her those years, so why would he this year? Amazingly enough, that actually worked. I also stayed in the room with her until she went to sleep. In the morning, she was finally fine, and we had a great holiday. I reported the mall Santa Claus to the mall, but without any evidence other than our word, they couldn't do anything about it. Number 2. The present. When I was younger, I recall my older brother always trying to keep me from believing in Santa Claus. It was like a mission of his. I never really knew why, but whenever he had a chance to try and prevent me from believing, he would. On one occasion, while both of my parents were not at home, He snuck me into the room and opened the closet. He showed me the presents, not yet wrapped. That wasn't enough to cause me any issue until later that year, when the presents I had seen were tagged, being from Santa Claus. I eventually brought this up to my parents, and they told me that Santa Claus brings some presents, and the parents buy some too. I was quite happy with that explanation. I needed to get that information out of the way, because it does affect what happened one Christmas morning when I was 11 years old. In the weeks leading up to Christmas, there were presents from the family being put under the tree, and bit by bit, the tree was getting filled with presents. Hell, by Christmas Eve I was surprised that Santa Claus would be able to fit anything extra under there. It was a pretty good present year. I remember going to sleep that night, my belief in Santa Claus as strong as ever, and when I woke up, I recalled going downstairs to check out the Christmas tree, which had gained so many more presents. It was an exciting morning. Of course, we all had to wait until breakfast before we began opening the presents up. But that was minor. And once it was done, we began. Every year we picked one person to go under the tree and find a present for each member of the family. And this year was no different. I got a lot of really nice presents that year. Little by little, presents under the tree began to deplete. The floor was covered with wrapping paper, and there were gifts everywhere. Now, almost everything had been opened. My mom went over to the tree, and she picked up a box. It was wrapped in different paper than any of the other presents had been. It didn't have a bow on it either. All it had was the name label on it, and it was to me. But there was no indication as to who the present was from. My mom gave my dad a weird look, and I recall seeing him shrug. So she just then handed the present over to me. I got the wrapping paper off the present pretty quickly. It was like a plastic Tupperware container, opaque, so you couldn't see what was inside it. I was further confused, but decided to open the container to find out what was in it. The stench from the container was overwhelming. Laying inside the container were several dead and decomposing snakes. I had been 11 years old and, at this point, extremely frightened, screamed, and jumped back from the container. My dad went over to it and saw what had scared me. He immediately turned to my brother, asking him if he had done this. My brother, however, seemed just as frightened as I had been. Plus, we had no idea how he would have gotten snakes, let alone killed them. My dad took the container, sealed it, and went into his garage. At first, the only thing that had worried me was the present itself. I was too scared to even consider the possibility that the only way it could have gotten under the tree was if someone had broken into the house. But when my dad returned from the garage, he explained to my mom that the garage door was ajar. It was open, just enough so that someone would have been able to roll under it. Someone had indeed broken into our home and left this ghastly present under the tree for me. We didn't have anything like CCTV cameras or anything like that. There was nothing we had that could indicate who the person who broke in was. My parents ended up not calling the police, figuring Christmas had been tainted enough without taking it further. I never found out who left that present under the tree. I figured maybe it was the neighborhood bully, and that they would give themselves away by gloating about it. No such luck. No one outside of my immediate family ever expressed any knowledge of that bizarre Christmas gift, and to this day, I don't know who, how, or why it was left for me. Number 3. Party. My first year in college, I wasn't able to afford to travel home for Christmas break, or winter break, whichever one you want to call it. I stayed in my dorm room for the entire period of time. My parents shipped my Christmas presents to me, and I really dreaded my very first Christmas all by myself. Now, I've heard plenty of stories from other students who had to spend time in their dormitories all alone. Most of them tell about how lonely and isolating one can feel in such big buildings all by themselves. My experience was very much like that too. The semester was over in early December, and that very weekend there was a mass exodus of students from campus. And by Sunday morning, the campus had turned into a barren tundra, frozen and empty. There were still a few weeks until Christmas, though. I have to admit that as the days went by and the loneliness became worse and worse, I began enjoying a little bit too much to drink. And by the time that Christmas had actually come around, I was really dying for some contact with some other people. I wanted to go out to a bar, but I was only 19. And although I could easily get alcohol from the liquor store that was known for never carding, I wasn't brave enough to go into a bar all by myself. I did, however, begin talking to a townie about a week before Christmas. It was online. I was telling him how much the cabin fever was getting to me, and I was not brave enough to go to a bar. He told me that he was having a Christmas party on Christmas Eve, and that I could come over if I wanted to. I'd been on the fence about whether I wanted to go to a stranger's house on Christmas Eve. However, I was so lonely by the time it came around that all my hang-ups were gone. I checked with him and got the address. I didn't have a car, so I had to walk over to his house. It wasn't too bad of a walk, even though it was really cold outside. It was also snowing that evening. I walked through town, following the directions I was given. I ended up going down a street and eventually finding a brick townhouse with the address on it. I had to check to make sure, because there were no lights on in the house at all. There were no cars on the street either. While I texted the guy, I walked past the house. I asked him to confirm the address, and he did. I then casually asked him how the party was going. He told me that there were a lot of people at the house, and that the party was hopping. He was looking forward to me getting there. I couldn't figure it out. I mean, there was no indication in any way that anyone, much less a whole party full of people, were at that house. So I worked up my nerve and decided to walk past the house again. I checked the direction of the street, wondering maybe if the house I had gone by had a south address and not a north one. Nope. Everything indicated that the dark house I had gone by was the place that this party was supposedly going on at. So what was I going to do? The situation was just really weird. I considered just walking up to the house and knocking on the door. Maybe everyone had walked to the party, and the party was going on in the basement. I didn't know, but I couldn't explain the darkness and lack of cars when there was supposedly a hopping party going on. I walked down an alley in order to check out the back of the house. There was nothing different. I couldn't find any windows to a basement to see if there were any lights on, and it was while I was standing there in the alley trying to figure out what to do when I heard a horrible scream of agony come from inside the house. I stood there for a moment before I panicked and moved up against the wall. That's when I heard another horrible, agonized sound. It was definitely coming from inside the house. I left the alley and ran a few houses away, and then called the police and reported what I saw, anonymously. A night later there was a news report on the television. 2 men were arrested for torturing a college student in that house. The defendants claimed it was hazing, but that didn't help them any. I knew it wasn't hazing though, because I had been invited to the house too, and I was sure the other guy was too. And Lord knows, I wasn't a member of any fraternity. Hey y'all, Killer Orange Cat here. I was gonna make this a 6-story video, but I decided to break the 6 stories down into 2 separate videos. That way I was able to get this out now, and I can try to get the next one out this weekend. If you like this video, please let me know by hitting the like button. If you're not already subscribed to Killer Orange Cat, feel free to hit the subscribe button below and the bell, or wait for the icon of Ichigo the cat that will appear at the end of this closing. Leave me a comment to let me know what you thought of the video, and share it with someone you think might enjoy it. If you have an original story you'd like narrated on Killer Orange Cat, please email it to the address included in the description. But most important, make sure to check in your closet and check under your bed, because you never know where a Killer Orange Cat might be hiding. Good night.